had to close my practice because my business partner passed away. And I was trying to get clients to pay because really we had to do a tax return and it was very tough to have cancer. So I contacted the client and I realized that, my business partner did all the work. It was building regulations drawings. You know how much? They didn't pay him. They didn't pay him, and when I asked for the money, they said, we don't have the letter, we don't have this. I went back into my email because I was sick at the time and he did all the work. And there was a letter of contract. There was a letter, saying for this service. And they basically, the guy was an accountant, absolutely minted. You know how much he paid for the full set of drawings? 1,000 quid. That was that. So I'm letting people do it to get the custom in. And he was a very good architect, but we have to buy, it's exactly what you say about the value, the price of who we are. I think we can be optimistic if we cannot feed our children.
I agree.
And I'm sorry, Victoria's probably going to say, I don't know, shut up.
No, I suppose I just want to say that today there's been some difficult discussions had, some difficult things raised. I do think it's important that we talk about it, even though that some of the views, I definitely don't agree with all of Jason's podcast. I went on Jason's podcast and I spoke very positively about architectural education. The snapshots of interviews with tutors, you do get that within architectural education. Is it everywhere? No. I'm very proud to be part of a school that does not treat students in that way, and also I'm very proud of the schools that I've been part of also do not treat students in that way. I hope. I've got some of my lovely graduates here today. So I think it's important, but also one of the things I wanted to add is all of my career, when I've discovered things that I don't feel very happy about, I stand up and try and change something. So the whole reason that I'm an educator is because I didn't have a very nice experience as a student. It was in the early 2000s, it was completely different to how it is today. That motivated me not to be like that. So I hope that the students that are among us and the graduates, and also academics and architects, will take from today that if there isn't something that you're very happy with or you feel passionate about, that you will feel motivated and empowered to do something about it and to not just hide away. And I'm a big believer in you can actually make positive change if you want to. So even though there are issues within the profession, that doesn't mean that you have to accept them, and that doesn't mean that the whole profession is black and dark and negative and horrible place. I've had a wonderful career within architecture and I absolutely love it and embrace it. So so that's just my little point, and I'd like to introduce Dominic, who's going to talk to us for the next bit. Thank you.
So I hope I can actually tie together a lot of what the previous speakers have said, because a lot of them have touched on different parts of my journey and different parts of my experiences. I'll be talking about what I've called the future of architecture, but really it's just about how has technology played a role in my path in architecture and my architectural education at that too. Just to give you some background context, I will be giving you some background information about my educational background, because I am from London, but I was educated in America. So there was talks about America, so I could talk of my specific school I went to, the type of education I got at my school, and there's some of the history behind that. Talk about some of the current state of architecture, and people have touched on the current state of architecture, to be honest. In the last presentation, there was a little bit of talk about the impact of technology in architecture, and I'm seeing it more and more, and my journey into architecture actually started from the technological standpoint, talking a little bit about women's contributions to technology and architecture, challenging opportunities, and to summarize with some key takeaways. If anyone didn't catch my name, I'm Dominic Norton. Just to give you some background context about me so you can understand where some of my thinkings come from. I'm a former international athlete, played basketball at a very high level. That's what actually took me to the States, so I got a scholarship to go to school in America. I studied architecture for the first 3 years, but the last 2 years I studied construction science and management. I went into the field, and my internships was in virtual design construction. So we more call it building information modeling over here. In America, more virtual design construction. I went further down into the tech rabbit hole, and I actually raised 150K in New York for a HR tech company. Funny enough, you mentioned Glassdoor. We built a similar platform, but specifically to report on diversity on companies, did very, very well in terms of consumers, in terms of businesses. That type of business gets tricky on how you actually make money with a Trustpilot or Glassdoor. I've been a guest lecturer in a number of universities, professionally speak about technology across the world, and I have a charity called Missing Black People. We work with police forces and charities across the UK to assist with missing people campaigns. Going into my architectural education, so I went to a school called Tuskegee University. Tuskegee University is a HBCU, one of about 107 HBCUs. For those that are not familiar with a HBCU, it's a historically black college and university. So in America, after the Emancipation Proclamation, so when people were freed, you had a lot of people that were formerly enslaved, freed, that wanted education, that couldn't get education, because even though they were free, they wasn't allowed in a lot of the schools. So there was a lot of schools across America that was established as institutions for higher learning, and Tuskegee University is one of them. With Tuskegee University, it has a very, very unique history in terms of the first president of the School of Architecture. So the first lead of the School of Architecture was Robert R. Taylor. He was the first person, the first African American to go to MIT, and the first African American licensed architect, who was also the first lead of the School of Architecture at Tuskegee. And Robert R. Taylor had a very, very specific philosophy to that they carry on today, which is learn by doing. So I flip back to Whitehall. A lot of the buildings on campus were actually built by the students. They were designed by the students, built by the students. A lot of the brick was manufactured from the surrounding area. This is in Alabama. So there was a real practical knowledge to what was being taught, and it was really applied, and that's carried on throughout the generations, even to this day. Which you'll see why that's actually relevant as we go through the presentation and you learn more about my journey. A little bit about the state of architecture. So as we all know, and that it's been mentioned in a couple of the presentations, that I don't think, even though here today we're talking specifically about architecture, every industry is getting hit right now. So the economy is shrinking across the board, and individuals and businesses are spending less. Why that impacts those that are architects, those that are in adjacent professions, is because now clients have less to spend. If it's a private client, if it's government, everybody has less to spend on architectural services. Not only that, we're finding that we are entering, or have entered, a housing crisis. We have population growth, housing shortages, and if you're any age now, you may understand that there are affordability issues when you're trying to buy a home. Again, I'm from London. I actually live in Edinburgh right now, but that's a whole nother story.
Do you like it?
Love it. But in the architectural profession, you're finding main contractor awards falling by 50% so this is 2013, from 2012 to 2013. Practices are reporting 8% less levels of workload, 9% of practices are expecting to employ fewer staff. Again, I don't want to push you away from the field of architecture, but I want you to be informed and strategic, especially as I share my story of my role in the field and how I entered architectural fields. At the beginning, I mentioned I was a virtual design construction engineer. Does anybody actually know what that is?
No.
Okay, so I think BIM was mentioned previously. So BIM stands for Building Information Modeling. I'm not sure if I have it on this slide, but it is about the construction and lifecycle management of the built assets. So if you think about everything in this building has data. All the materials have data, all the electrical have data, everything has data, and someone has to manage that. I didn't actually work for the architectural firm, I worked for the general contractor. So I actually worked for the builders, and the builders were the one getting the contracts. Bear in mind, I worked for a very, very big company in the US, where the clients we're dealing with were Mercedes, Microsoft, Blue Origin, like huge companies. But I was working for the builder, and we hired the architect. So I wouldn't say the chain of command was a little different, the authority was a little different on like what falls on who. But my role, or one of my roles, was something called clash detection. So usually the architects, typically, let's say in a everyday firm here in the UK, the architect will get the contract, they give it to the people building and say, hey, go and build my thing. And then what you see is the electrical, mechanical, everyone else that produces their own model brings it all together and it just doesn't work. You might have the structural in the wrong place when it comes to the model, you might have electrical in the wrong place, or when you actually get to build it in the site, there's all these mistakes. And in the field, every day can cost you millions or hundreds or thousands, every day is a lot of money, let alone any change orders that have to happen. So if you find out, hey, this needs to go, they need to put in the change order, find the one that you can substitute it for, send it back, wait for it to come back, and that's delay that's costing everybody a lot of money. So what we try to do is before we even get to the site, you need someone to coordinate all these contractors. So I will sit on the call, usually it's remotely. I sit in the office, I have mechanical team, I have electrical team, I have the structural team, I have the architect, and I bring all their models together and I say, hey, we have 10,000 clashes of all your models, let's try and fix this. So that's one of the roles I have. Another role I have is laser scanning. So I might come into the site, I bring this machine similar to how I have my tripod, stick it down, scan the site, and I see, hey, is this actually what the architect said we had to build? So I'm comparing what's actually in the site to what the architect's model is, and say, hey, there's discrepancies, why is this wrong? Because this is, again, costing us money, and the sooner we can figure that out, the better. All of that is tech related. That is actually an architectural service that's sat under the general contractor. So sometimes we would put it in the bill of our actual bigger contract, or sometimes just as an individual team, we would have our own contract that's separate from the whole company. I'm sure you guys have questions at the end. There's lots of like different tech-related things. I have virtual reality here, augmented reality here. There's lots of tech side of it that I can expand on at the end if you want. But what we're actually finding is 73% of practices are aware of and using building information modeling, especially as sustainability gets more into the conversation. Admittedly, in rooms like this, it's easy to say that it's getting done seamlessly. In the field, it's not as, people are not using it as much as you would like them to use it, and it's not consistent. Other things we was doing was using drones for inspecting buildings to find leaks. I mentioned laser scanning. Some of the service that we had in BIM and as a virtual design construction engineer is, so I think somebody actually mentioned in a previous presentation, maybe that's a sign up, but what we do, an architect will come with a design, and as long as it's being built virtually, I can put it in a virtual environment, stick on the HoloLens, and we can actually walk through the building and actually talk about it in the virtual environment. And now, especially with generative AI, there's lots of conversations about how is AI being used in architectural practices, in the construction practice, in really anything to do with the built environment. And I have a really nice statistic here, 92% of construction companies intend to use AI and this is 2022. Now, again, when you look at statistics and practice, very different things. They intend to use AI, are they actually using it? It's hit or miss. But with AI, you still get lots of challenges. One of the biggest challenges, especially when it comes to inclusion, is bias in technology. I'll give you a good example. It said, was it 92%? 92% of construction companies intend to use AI. Most of us here might know that bias in AI is a huge thing, especially with the training data. But when we're asking algorithms to determine, let's say, floor plans or determine cities, what does good mean? You have to teach the AI what good means, and that's where your bias will come into it. If we leave it, if those that are experts in the built environment and experts in the field leave it to technologists to determine, the bias is only going to be expanded upon. What actually needs to happen is the experts need to really actively influence what these algorithms, what data they use, what do they mean, where are they actually being used. And right now, I don't actually think the conversation's happening as much as it should happen, considering how fast the technology is moving. But also economic and social barriers. So I have a Tesla here. I'm not sure if I don't actually see too many driverless vehicles here, but especially in the US, the landscape is a lot different, especially when it comes to vehicles and driving. And when you're seeing driverless vehicles, I think in another video, I have this is meant to be like some personal helicopter thing that companies are working on. But when you see these things, what you're seeing is the technology industry really push the bounds of what society looks like. And we need those that are, whether they're architects or adjacent to the architectural fields, to be actively involved in these conversations, or one day you're going to turn around and the city's going to be filled with driverless vehicles with no consideration on how people feel. And I'm including this because it's really, really important, especially when we're talking about technology. So there's 3 people that I wanted to highlight in this presentation. So Gladys May West, so she was, or is the pioneer of GPS systems, again in the US, mathematician, and why that's relevant to architecture and technology, especially when we're talking about BIM, we're talking about drones, we're talking about data, we're talking about GPS systems. All of that connects back to the work that she defined and she innovated. When we're talking about AI, Ada Lovelace is considered the first computer programmer. A lot of the stuff and concepts we're talking about today, she was talking about a very, very long time ago. And I don't think women in technology, especially in the early days of what we call technology today, have really been credited, especially how it's flipped, now it's male dominated, it wasn't always male dominated. And obviously Zaha Hadid, so I'm not sure if you've seen, I have her work throughout the presentation, but while I was an architecture student, one of the things that professors noticed with me is that not only that I love technology, but the things that I was using for precedent were more technology focused. So I was coming to my professor and say, hey, I want to build that. How do I build that? Like you see how our buildings were on campus. I'm like, yeah, that's cool, but I want geometric designs. I want parametric architecture. I want things like a 3D print. And Zaha Hadid was a big inspiration for me, but I'm sure a big inspiration for a lot of people too. Challenges and opportunities. I think one of the biggest challenges, and it was mentioned in someone else's presentation, is keeping up with the pace of technology, especially if you're in industry. If you're a student, a little bit easier, still challenging, but if you're in industry, keeping up with the pace of technological advancement. I mentioned AR, VR, I mentioned AI, I didn't even mention blockchain. There's all these different segments in technology where it intersects with architecture, intersects with city planning, intersects with the built environment, and it can be very challenged to keep up with that, to work, and then also to live your regular life. What I typically say to people, especially like my mentees, is like, I'm a technologist. It's my passion. It's what I love. It's gonna like I play sports too. It intersects with sports. It intersects with everything I love. It's natural for me. I feel like I don't want to pressure people that it's not natural for, and I don't think technology is natural for everybody. Inside the tech industry, you have famous CEOs say, oh, everyone should learn how to code. I don't believe. If that's your affinity, like that's what I think you should lean into. But I think everybody should at least explore, is there somewhere in the tech field that intersects with their passion for design, intersects with their passion for architecture, that they can find a niche and specialize in. We're finding that there's more and more economic and market pressures. I think, especially if you're a student in the room, the market is, our philosophies towards work, and also the market is very, very different. People are spending less time in their job. People are changing jobs all the time. I think that's become a norm for younger generations, but things are changing. One thing I want to stress is adaptability. I was having a conversation with somebody in the room earlier. I said the biggest thing that I got from architecture school is not learning how to design space or models or anything like that. It was problem solving. And problem solving is a transferable skill across any industry. So if you have that core foundation of problem solving, which if you're in architecture school, if you have that education, you should have, then you'll be okay in whatever field you go into, but you have to have the courage to pursue other fields too. Social responsibility and ethical consideration. So this is really interesting, and I wasn't sure if it was in another presentation or in a conversation, but we was talking about climate, and we was talking about wars going on, and we was having interesting conversations. And I think one of the challenges that I had in the field is that I worked for such a big company. I'm from East London, from a lower income area in East London. And I got all the way to the US, worked for a very big company on a very good salary, and we was doing great work, but it was so far removed from the impact I wanted to have. And for me, I wanted to use my skills in a way that really helped communities, and I never felt that I was really helping communities. And for me, I found a way to still make money, but also find a way to help communities and work in areas where I'm actually valuing the work I'm doing from an impact standpoint. And lastly, multidisciplinary collaboration. So as you may realize, my skill set is now across lots of disciplines, but a lot of industries are moving that way. So don't feel, especially if you're a student, don't feel you just have to put yourself in a box of architecture. If you love music too, or maybe you love dance, or maybe you love all these different things, pursue your interests and they will align somewhere down the line. So I have a couple key takeaways. The first takeaway is be kind. So be kind to yourself, find your unique path, interests and opportunities. As you can see, I started in architecture school, worked my way into technology. I have a charity that's doing very, very well, but obviously sometimes that's hard with family pressures, friend pressures, and just to not put too much pressure on yourself. The world's gonna put all the pressure on you. You don't need to put all that pressure on yourself. Stay curious. I think that's a trait that we have in architecture school. If you've gone through this education, you're always curious, you're always thinking. You just make sure the world doesn't beat that out of you, because sometimes it can beat, or at least try to beat that out of you. Yeah, just stay curious, ask questions, explore, and lastly, seek impact. So one of the things I really, really believe is both technology and architecture, and I haven't actually gone through it in this presentation, but there's lots of examples of architecture being weaponized against communities, and technology is the same way. And I think, at least in architectural education, at least in my education, I was always taught to use the skills that I'm learning to try and impact communities positively. And I think we always have to try and pursue that, even though sometimes you might be at a firm or you might be at a larger company that is trying to use those skills for, I say for bad, but for reasons that you might not want to use them. So find value alignment, most importantly, especially when it comes to impact. Does anybody have any questions?
I'm curious, what are you doing in Edinburgh?
I live there now.
Do you work there, or?
Yeah, so are you familiar with companies in Edinburgh?
Well, I lived and worked there as an architect for 15 years. So.
Are you familiar with Codebase?
Yeah.
So Codebase is a incubator, a technology incubator, an accelerator that was funded like 60 mil to the Scottish government to improve entrepreneurship across Scotland. So 7 or 8 regions, and I was over their programs, so helping all the entrepreneurs.
Oh, really?
innovate them.
Okay. You like it?
Yeah, I love it. I mean, it's a bit cold, but that's
It
just
is,
cold.
it is. I was very it is very cold.
So I live
Where do you live?
like 10 minutes away from the castle wall.
In the new town or in the?
Yeah, in downtown. Yeah.
Wow.
Edinburgh is amazing.
It's a great town, isn't
Yeah.
it? It is.
People amazing. Everything's good,
You can walk everywhere.
and it's cheaper than London.
Very expensive.
It's getting more
It's expensive for Scotland,
Yeah.
but I'm coming from London, so I love
This
it.
is true. So, I mean, I'm just curious because you have quite a mix. It seems some of the things in America to be really developed in terms of technology.
Maybe they didn't realize
Yeah.
he's black because Dominic is not, ex-white guy, maybe so when they employed him, they thought he's American, white guy. They were surprised, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. In terms of technology, especially in terms of technology in the architectural fields,
Yeah.
a lot more advanced. I mean, the only equivalents are like Belfort Beatty, like those huge,
Companies, construction.
yeah, but a lot more
For working,
advanced.
what did you prefer? Working in America or working
Yes, a lot more money.
A lot more money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially coming out of school, a lot more.
Really? But you also have to pay a lot more for your school.
Well, I was on scholarship. I played. I played
because of
sport. Yes.
basketball. I see.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed your presentation.
Yeah.
Actually, I think it was
What was the BIM software you were using in the US?
So, and it's funny because I started in university. I was speaking to someone that is in university here. They don't use it much. I started in. So the first 2 years, you're not allowed to touch no technology. So you're not allowed. You're not allowed to use the laser cutter for your models. No 3D printing for your models. Everything by hand. All your drawings by hand. But then you start with SketchUp. You move to Revit. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Rhino.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
But Rhino is more on the, if you want to
That's
make
parametric.
these, if you want to make these, not everyone, you don't ever have to touch that unless you want to make something like that.
Yeah.
I think the unique part about my education is that I actually knew how buildings were built because that was the history of the school.
Yeah.
So in a lot of architecture schools, it's just design. I can tell you like, oh no, you can't use this structural column. Oh no, like you can't use these windows and this brick. Like I could tell you, I could estimate how much it was going to cost because that was a part of our
Yeah.
education.
Yeah. So we use Revit in our practice. I want to practice in Liverpool, and we embraced Revit. Like second year that it's been open 6 years now. Second year we made sure that everyone was becoming Revit proficient because it was clear that's the direction that most contractors wanted to go because of clash detection and all of that stuff. And then what that opened up for us, moreover, was we could then produce CGIs and the visual virtual reality stuff that you were talking about. That becomes really easy once you embrace Revit because
So I actually have it like there's so for the students here, a lot of this stuff is free and a lot of stuff's on YouTube. And by the way, after you're a student, a lot of this software is hard to get. Like there's a lot of this
It's
software.
expensive,
It's very
Revit's
expensive.
very
It's almost impossible. So
get it while it's free.
yeah, get it while it's free. Highly recommend get it while it's free. So you have AR, VR, and it's a plugin. So if you made your model in Revit already, just use the plugin, check it out, and when you're presenting, your professor's like, "Oh wow, that's amazing," and you know, it's what a minute less of questions.
We might have to move on and have a discussion at the end.
Yeah.
I'm just
So I
conscious
do.
we've
So
got
if
to-
anyone has any questions, let me know. There's some interesting things in metaverse that architecture firms are doing, and there's some interesting AI things. So like, this was a video. This is an image, right? But this part is AI,
Really?
and the whole thing's the image. So all they did is like erased a certain part, said to AI, "Oh, I want this," and gave it a sketch, and that's what it produced. So really interesting things.